Okay, we're live, it says.
Yep, do you want to go, Bruce?
Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us. It's either if you're watching this now and participating or watching it later, it's a real pleasure to have you here. So this is our first shot at something that we're trying to do with Google Apps Script community. And if you like it, well, you know, we might make it a regular event. Let's see how it goes. So our idea here was to build on something that the product group within Google used to do. So they used to have something that was called Unscripted, which was a kind of a broadcast they had like every month or something like that. And you had some guys from Google that would come on and tell you some new things that had come out from Google and take some questions and answers and so on. Well, we're not going to do exactly that because, first of all, we don't really know what's coming out from Google until it comes out. So instead, we're going to use this as a community experience for us all, so that first of all we get to know each other a bit better than we do. We have a great community, the Google Apps Script community. It's a great place for people to share ideas, and I think we've got a lot of people helping each other, so that's really good. But I think we could do better by getting to know each other and getting familiar with each other's problems a bit more. So that's the purpose of this meeting. We actually had a lot of trouble getting the Hangout on air to work last time. We did a run through a couple of weeks ago, but thanks to Martin and his persistence, he managed to figure it out. So hopefully we've got the measure of it now. So thanks, Martin, and maybe this will make it to YouTube, maybe it won't. But before we get started, let's talk about housekeeping a little bit. So Martin will talk through the logistics of Hangouts, and he'll go through what we're going to talk about today. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Bruce. So if you didn't see the unscripted stuff, so with the way that we're going to hopefully run this, and as Bruce says, this is very much work in progress, so we might evolve this over time. So we've got a couple of slots to fill. So first, we're going to do some new stuff from Google. So we'll have some examples of things that you can do with AppScript, just that you might not be aware of, that has come out quite recently. And then next, we thought we'd have some coding examples from the community. So this might be responding to questions that have been posted up in the AppScript community, or something that perhaps you've developed yourself that you just want to showcase, show off, and then hopefully at the end we'll have some time for Q&A. So for those who aren't actually able to make it into the Hangout, we have the Q&A module enabled on the event page. So if you have any questions as we go along, you can post them in there. When we're doing the demos and examples, we'll leave some time at the end of each of these for some brief questions about particular things. So that way we'll let people get through their demo before hitting them with the questions. So in terms of housekeeping for the Hangout itself, would ask people just keep their microphones muted. And when we get to Q&A sessions, then you're more than welcome to unmute and post your questions. I think that's everything. So I'm going to hand it back to Bruce, who's going to give us our first example, which is going to be looking at the new Google Sheets API and how we can use that within AppScript.
Okay, thanks, Martin. So one of the best things that came out of Google I/O this year, I think, was the Sheets version 4 API. And of course, the purpose of it is to get to Sheets from platforms that aren't AppScript, because you've got the spreadsheet service already in AppScript, so why would you need another API? Well, I'm going to show you two things. One is an example of accessing that API from a different platform. And then the second thing is a use that we can put it to within AppScript. So let's start with, I guess I'll have to figure out how to share my screen. Let's see. Entire screen, let's try that. So if I'm lucky, you should be seeing my screen, are you?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, excellent. So what am I in here? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at Excel. And as you know, then as a lot of people are migrating from Excel to Sheets. But one of the things that the new Sheets API gives us is a much more direct connection that we can make between other platforms, in this case Excel and Sheets. So very simply, this example, I'm in Excel right now. If I want that sheet to arrive in Sheets, I just do that, and then now when I go over back to Sheets, I've got this new tab with the data that I've just picked up from there. So that's pretty cool. Let's change that to some other number. Go back to Excel again, and we'll just pull the sheet from Google. And there's the new value that I just changed up there, so you can see it pulled it down. So that's actually all there is to it, really. I mean, obviously behind that there's a driver in Excel that I've written that uses oAuth 2 and the new Sheets API and everything else, but it's actually pretty straightforward to use, and you can imagine the type of interaction you can now do between Excel and Sheets that you couldn't do before. It's really going to help with migration. So that's one example of that. I'll maybe, if we've got time later, I might show you the code for that. The second thing, though, is probably of more interest to you guys, and that's, why would you need it in AppScript? Well, let's get back here, and let me bring up an add-on. So what we have here is we have an add-on that's using get values to get all the data that's in this sheet. Now, the problem is, though, if I use a filter, and I maybe filter a few values here, let's just take a few, then the data reduces, but the values are the same because there isn't a way in AppScript to be able to respect filters, to notice whether or not there even is one, and secondly, to apply them. So if you, let me just enable that now. So I've got a thing here that respects filters. And now my chart is reduced to just the stuff that's in the filter. So the way that that works is that it's still using the regular spreadsheet app methods to get data. However, it's also using the Sheets API to go off and find if there's any filters active in that sheet and if they apply to the data that's being looked at right now. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't actually return the data for you filtered. So what you have to do is to notice if there is a filter and then figure out how to apply it. But aside from that, it's a great example of, by combining capabilities that are not yet available in spreadsheet service with the new stuff that's come along with the API, how you can make much more interactive, if you like, and responsive apps. So that's kind of all I have on the on those couple of examples. I might, if I've got time, show you the code. Do I have time on?
Yeah, let's see the code.
Okay. So we'll start on Excel. I'll only spend a few seconds on that. So obviously there's, as I say, some code behind this, but in principle, if you're using this driver that I've written, it boils down to this: get stuff from Sheets, which gets all the values that exist on the sheet and puts them in the current sheet, as you saw. That's pulling the data, and then putting the data is the opposite. Stuff to Sheets, reads the data from Excel and writes things up to Google Sheets. So really, it's as simple as that, using the libraries that are available. So now let's go to over to Sheets, and we'll look at how that works. So here's the code for that add-on that we were looking at a moment ago. So normally you'd be using this piece of code here, which just is a regular get values. So it looks a bit more complicated than it is, but it's really just get values. So how do we, well, again, there's another library that's being used here, but a bit of code involved in that. But in principle, to use, it's very straightforward. We create a new instance of that object that takes care of all the interaction with the Sheets API. We'll give it an oAuth token to use, which spreadsheet to be looking at, and various other bits and pieces. And then we get values. So down to this point, up to here, values would be containing an unfiltered view of the data on that sheet. However, if you instead take back this property, it will apply the filter that it found by using the Sheets API and cut down the data that you'll see to the values that pass the filter. So really straightforward to use. Quite a few bits of code behind the scene, but the API itself is really quite straightforward. So that's pretty much it.
Well, how's that going to? So obviously, this isn't a built-in service within AppScript. So for something like URL fetch, what kind of quota hit is that going to do?
Yeah. So obviously there's a quota. There's two kinds of quotas that are going to hit you here. URL fetch is you've got so many of those per day, 100,000 or something. So every time that you get data, then you're not using the Sheets API to actually get data. You're using the Sheets API to get whether there is a filter on that data. So that's a URL fetch right there. You're using the regular spreadsheet service to actually get the values. And there's another quota that they've introduced, which is to do with the Sheets API itself, and it's actually quite low. So in fact, you're potentially going to hit, if you're not a little bit careful, two problems in terms of quotas. One is URL fetch, which you're going to eat up a little bit, and the other is the Sheets API itself. But it's actually quite manageable. I think that if you know Romain Vaillard, he's introduced this method on his yet another mill merge app, his Addon, and he managed to get a little bit more quota, and he's got it working now. But yeah, that is going to be probably a short-term problem. Google said that they're going to be keeping the quotas a little small to start with to see what kind of hit this is going to make on their environment.
We've also got a question in from Sean Dennison, who wasn't able to get into Hangout but is watching. So just in terms of how you've implemented this into the add-on, he's asking about the event handler for this. So obviously we can't pull changes, or
Yeah.
perhaps you want to just explain how that works.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it as short as I can. But so what happens is that there's a polling that goes on. So every now and again, let's say every few seconds, then it checks it sends off a request to the server to say, hey, anything changed, and the server sends back either nothing's changed or it will send back the new data. So it keeps the amount of data that's actually transferred between the client and the server very small because most of the time nothing's changed. And the other thing that happens is that there's a JavaScript library that's used client-side to determine whether or not the spreadsheet is actually visible. So right now, I'm still running that add-on back in the spreadsheet that we looked at, and it's not polling right now because we're not looking at it. So if I move over to the sheet, that will start the polling again because it's detected that it's visible. But there won't be much in the way of traffic because nothing's changed in the data. Make sense?
Okay, so it's like in the sidebar that's detecting whether or not it's visible.
Yeah. So there's a client running over there that's regularly polling the server to say what's going on, and there will either be a very short reply saying nothing, or there'll be a longer reply saying here's the data that's changed.
Cool. And you've blogged all this on your site, so we'll include the notes in the show so that people can unpick this and perhaps implement it in their own scenarios.
Yeah, all this stuff is open source, so you can have it if you want. Okay.
Should we? I'm conscious of the time, so unless there's anything else that we can quickly pick up, perhaps we'll move on to you, Spencer. And
sure, that sounds good. All right. So a lot of the questions that come up in the forums and the different AppScript communities is talking about working with oAuth and specifically integrating the oAuth flow inside of an add-on. With our add-ons, we can access many third-party services, and most of them have an oAuth offering. And I'm going to show a small little kind of like a boilerplate setup of how to integrate those third-party services such as Twitter or Facebook. And in this case, today we're going to be talking about the Google People API and how to integrate that inside the workflow of your add-on. So I'll start. Let me share my screen here. All right, so let's go over to. So we'll just do a quick little demo of what we're going to expect at the very end. So I have a small little test environment set up. If we look at add-ons, I'll have a People API demo. You'll see that as of right now, you can click Enable Add-on because it's currently installed but not enabled for this spreadsheet. And now that it's enabled, you can say it's going to ask to authorize access. It's going to request that we can access profile information, and if you say yes, it's going to pop up. It's going to give you the options and the scopes. I've already accepted it, so it's not going to show all the scopes, but it would show you all the scopes on the first time you accept it. You hit allow. And you'll get a nice little menu saying that things have been accepted. But also on your add-on side, you have more control, and so you can also put that success notification on your add-on also. So you're going to get it in one window that comes back from the oAuth flow, and a status page inside your add-on. You can close that down. Add-ons, People API, and then say show my info now. And then we have now successfully pulled the data from my my account information and is displaying it. So we're going to go a little bit over the code of how to get that workflow going to be able to access that third-party API. So let's go over, close this down, and let's open up the code here. So add-ons require just a little bit of boilerplate to be able to be considered an add-on. First, you have an on-install, and this method is called when you install the add-on from the marketplace. And the other one is to create an add-on menu, where you could see, let's see, create add-on menu right here. So when your app is launched, it can be launched in a few different authentication modes, which is none, limited, and full. And based upon what current authorization level that you have, you'll have access to different services inside your add-on. So you have to make sure that you're watching out for what current authorization mode that you're on. Because, for example, we are going to be using the oAuth 2 library from, this is Google Samples. This is where this is linked directly from the development, from the documents on the Google App Page developer site. This is kind of like the semi-official oAuth 2 library that Google has put out. And this library requires access to the property store, which is not available if you're in auth mode none. So you have to make sure that you're testing. So for example, let's see, is my screen size big enough, or do you want me to make that bigger?
It's good enough for me.
All right. All right, so what you want to do is you want to make sure that if you're in limited and full mode, you actually have access to, such as reading the property service but if you're in auth mode none, you don't have access. So that means that your add-on is not currently enabled inside the spreadsheet. Even though it's installed, it's not enabled. And so you have to add one more click event to get it enabled. And once you've received at least one click inside your add-on, it's considered enabled, and you're going to be working in auth mode limited. So let's go over and look at. If you look at the GitHub and you look at the let's see, the samples, it says creating the OAuth 2 service. The code that I'm going to show you today is actually coming almost line for line out of the GitHub README. So it's very, it's very easy to follow, and it's pretty straightforward. I would say 90% of all the code that you use when you connect to an OAuth service, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or another Google API, it's exactly the same. There's maybe only 1 or 2 lines of code that you have to change different. So the first thing we have to do is we have to make sure we add the library to our project, and that can be found at the GitHub page. And it's also, just for a point of reference, this whole project that I'm showing you here is on my GitHub called Add-on OAuth Flow Example. And it has examples and setup instructions, including all the source. So we add the library using the included libraries box, and we're going to save that. So now the library is now added, and so once the library is added, look to the OAuth, you're going to see that it's going to require 2 sets of information to connect, and these 2 pieces of information are going to be the same no matter what service you're connecting to. It's going to be a client ID and a client secret, and usually you'll get these by registering with each of the services, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or what other, Zillow or something like that. They'll give you a client ID and a client secret, and these are the 2 pieces of cryptography that you'll need to connect your app to their service. So with Google, it's actually pretty easy because it's built right in. So if you go to Resources and you see your Developers Console project, you can link right to your console project using this link here. And the console project is where you'll enable Google services for your project, for your scripts, for your add-on. So for example, today we're going to be working with the People API. So we can search here. Here's the Google People API. We can enable it. But we also now need to set up a set of credentials. And you'll see over here there's a button called Credentials. And the kind of credentials, you'll see every app script has a set of credentials already created. I would recommend not touching those, because those are, if something gets goofed up on that, your project could stop working. So we'll just leave that alone, and we're going to create a new one called OAuth Client ID. And the type is a web application, since we are working on the web. And for now, let's see, we need to get the Authorized Redirect URI, and this is going to be unique for each of your projects. As of right now, usually you go to File, Project Properties, and you see this project key right here, and this is what you're looking for, but this is wrong. As of right now, as we're recording this, there's an outstanding issue with this project key returned is incorrect. So I have an example in my code right here called log redirect URI. And if you run this, all right, it's going to ask me for all my cool access. This is the first time I've run this script on this account here. So this is the script itself is asking for authorization. I can go look at my logs. So this right now is going to be the callback URI that it's going to return. So you just come here, you can copy this, and just paste that right there into the Authorized Redirect URI. And this is going to be for your project here. You can go ahead and hit create. And right here, it's going to say, here's your client ID and your client secret. So now you have this client ID, client secret. Best practice is to keep this in your script properties. You could save it inside your script itself as a variable or something like that, but that could lead to problems if, for example, you push your project up to GitHub or some other service. All of a sudden, you've now exposed your client secret, and that's not good because then anyone else can pretend that they're you. So the best practice is go to your project properties, script properties, and now you have a nice secret place that only editors of your project can get to. So for example, let's call this client ID. Now paste that client ID in right there. We'll come back here. We now have a client secret. Paste that in there. And go ahead and we'll hit save. And so now, we're creating the service, most of this is coming exactly word for word, line for line off of that GitHub repo. The only thing that I change is right here, where it says your scope. Your scope is going to be the scope of authorization that you're asking from the service. So, for example, the documentation for the people API says that the scope that it's looking for is the plus.login. If you're looking for Twitter, it's going to be account.info. So you'll have to look at the documentation for each of the third-party site that you're looking at to find out what the scope of authorization is, and then make sure it matches your needs of what you're going to be using in your app. So really, once those client IDs and client secret is in, you have your scope set properly. You now have some rest of this is authorization callback dialogues, show authorization dialogues. These all come from that documentation that on the GitHub, and I just added just nicer looking dialog boxes than what they had. But otherwise, the code is exactly the same. So now what we can do is we are pretty much all set up. So now when the user logs in, it's going to open up. It'll create an add-on menu. The add-on menu, depending on whether it says you have access, whether you currently have access to that third-party people API site, it'll either say show my info or it'll say authorize access. And if you are trying to show my info, it comes down here to say show my info, and you'll see that this is a call to the people API. This is the URL endpoint, and this is just a standard URL fetch that you probably have done many times, pointing to the URL, and their authorization, Google's authorization, is to pass the bearer token in the authorization header, and use your service to get the token. And from there, the rest of this is just parsing of the return data. So let's take a look at how this would look fresh right here. So we go to publish, test as add-on. Let's see. Let's make sure everything is saved. All right. So we want to test with the latest code. And the best way to test is to use installed for current user, because this gives you auth mode none, and this makes sure that you're testing for all cases. We can go ahead and select a document. Sure, let's just. So make sure enabled as no. And so now the test is going to open up that spreadsheet, and it's going to, I can't see what the error is. Here we go. It's going to open up the spreadsheet, and it's going to push your add-on in test mode. So now if you look at add-ons, Live People API demo, you'll now see that it'll say enable add-on. And now that the add-on is enabled, we're now in auth mode limited. So now that the oAuth library has access to see whether or not you have access, it says that you don't have access, authorize access. And then you go through that same. So here's this is the scopes, allow. Go back and you'll see that it knows that it's been successful. Add-ons. Show my info, and we're now connected up to that third-party API right within the workflow of your add-on. So let's. I know that went through pretty quick. There's quite a few steps to get that going, but once it's in place, you can take this template and use it for pretty much any other Google API or any other Google API that's not included in AppScript that you want access to. Let's see. All right, so I know that was a whirlwind tour, and there was a lot going on there. But once you get that workflow, down. Once you get that in place, you'll see that it's only a few extra steps to be able to connect to those third-party services.
That's great, Spencer. We've got a question in from Jonathan Broughton, who's asking for domain installed add-ons. How does this vary, or will it script straight through to the off mode enabled?
For domain install applications, it's the same thing as testing if you're in none, limited, or full, right? So you can, when you install the domain add-on, all your users will have the add-on. It will show up in your add-on bar, but unless they enable it inside that specific sheet, for example, it's still going to be running in auth mode none until that add-on has to receive one click event. It has to interact with your add-on at least once before it's considered enabled for that spreadsheet, and then you're working in either auth mode, limited, or full based upon the current setup.
Well, hopefully that answers Jonathan. So a question from me. So when you're getting the scopes, where are you getting those from? So is there a particular part of for Google APIs that you're going to in terms of the documentation to pick those up?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, and I can show you. I'll go back to screen share here. So for example, here's the Google People API. They've kind of unified all the interface. So for example, if you go under Reference, and you want to look at a certain thing, say for example you want to get a person, so you have people, use the get. You're gonna usually you'll find right down here. You'll say authorizations, see profile scopes for more information. You click that link, and it's going to tell you all the different scopes. So you can say profile, email, and it tells you everything on the right-hand side of what you'll have access to versus the scope that you're asking for. And each of the documentation is set up in this similar way.
Actually, I'd recommend you use the API Explorer to find out, because the API Explorer is something you can use to try things out before you actually write any scripts to do anything. So it issues a request and shows you what's going to come back. But at the same time, when it issues the request, it shows you the scopes that are available for the thing that you want to do. So if you get into the mode, you find the API Explorer, by the way, when you saw that Spencer authorized the service as part of the console, the developers console, there was a place there to say, do you want to try it? And if you click on that, it'll take you to the API Explorer. And then the first thing it does is say, hey, these are all the scopes you'll need to do what you're asking to do. So if you get into that mode, it's great to test it all out before you even write a piece of code. That's what I do. I think a lot of people do it that way too.
I think they're also integrating the Explorer into the documentation now. Is that right, or am I making that up?
Well, actually, there was a link to the Explorer in the page that Spencer just looked at. So yeah, they have done that too.
We've got another question for you, Spencer, from Sean Dennison this time. How does the user callback URI work for all usages and installs of the add-on?
How does the URI work for all usages, installs of an add-on? Well, the user
So this is the
callback.
callback.
Yeah, the user callback URI is specific to just each project will have its own callback URI. This is related to the state builder token service. This allows you to start and stop scripts and remember the state in between. So that's where this callback URI work. It's going to be, you're only going to need one per add-on. So you just need to install it that one time, and then it doesn't matter how many times your add-on is installed. It can be run 100,000 times. It uses the same callback URI. If that's what you're asking, maybe Martin, you know.
I think that's what Sean was. I think it does vary though slightly, because I've used oAuth 2 in project libraries, and it's like you can't instigate the oAuth flow from the application that's using the library. If you see what I mean, you have to bump out onto a web app generated by the library to start the oAuth flow there. So that's something to be aware of if you're using this within a library context. But it's, as Spencer has described, it's a lot more straightforward within add-ons.
That redirect URI function, did that just come about when they changed the project IDs they were using internally? Because so did you used to be able to use the project ID from the script editor?
Yeah, in fact, that's just an open issue, right? That's an open issue right now, of because we've noticed that the project ID is now between the execution API, the state builder token. They're all using different IDs now. For example, the execution API has to use the one that's reported in the IDE versus the one that's reported using the library service. So it's an open issue. If anyone wants to go take a look at it, they should go start it, because it's confusing and it's making a little bit extra steps that we shouldn't have to take to get this working.
We'll try and pull out.
So that redirect UI though, will that always return the right callback function?
It will.
URL.
Yeah.
So fix it,
yeah, the little piece of code will always return the correct redirect URI that I put in there. Yeah.
We'll also try and pull out the issue ticket and drop it into the event page, so you can go and start it and follow when it's actually fixed. Are there any other questions from either from the stuff that Spencer's presented, or Bruce, or perhaps another question that's on your mind?
I had one about the script properties, because the user properties, they don't turn up in the script editor, do they? When you go into project, you don't see the user properties, do you, if you set the user properties? But it's just the script properties. Is that just something that was left over from the old property service that used to be there? And do you think there's any chance that they're going to they might turn off the script properties that you can access from the script editor?
Well, my opinion on that is that what you see in user properties in scripts now is left over from old, as you say. The script properties are the current ones, and you can't see the current user properties. But when you think about it, it makes sense you can't see the user script properties, because generally speaking, it would belong to some other user than you. You're the guy who wrote the script, but the user properties probably belong to lots of different people. So it makes sense that you wouldn't be able to see those. But I don't see that they'll turn off the UI access to the script properties, because it does make sense to be able to see them. So I think it's sensible the way that they've done things now. I guess in due course they should really turn off the user properties from the UI, because they're confusing nowadays and they're pretty worthless in any case. So I can imagine that they'll go away. The script ones are pretty much, in my opinion, bound to stay, and it makes sense that you can't see the user ones.
And to add on a little bit on that, they are. It's pretty worthless because if you look right now, it will show you your personal user settings. So as the developer, if you're running one of your add-ons and you have user properties, it'll show you your personal ones, but no one else's. So it really doesn't make any sense in the context of being in the IDE, because it doesn't do anything for the development of other people. It's only your own personal, whoever's currently authenticated in the IDE, it'll only show their personal ones. So yeah, it's really not of much use.
Something that's bit me with the property service is the last time I looked anyway, there was a quota for the number of times you could write, but there isn't a documented quota number of times that you can read, but there is a limit. So if you're reading from property service a lot, then one way around this is to use the cache service. If these the properties aren't changing, you're just picking up a key multiple times, then that's something that's caught me out in the past. Have we got any other questions?
I'll ask a quick question about that. You said about the cache service. Seeing as these are all going to be server calls, do you think, although it's obviously going to save you a lot of time if you're doing something to kind of a remote URL, if you're ever doing a call to a Google service, I guess there's never any advantage to using the cache service rather than, saying, doing a big batch of spreadsheet calls or something.
Well, yeah,
they're all going to take the same amount.
Well, there is an advantage in the sense that you're not using up any quota that way, because the cache service doesn't have quota. So essentially, I would say that any time that it makes sense to use the cache, then use it. Always try and think, hey, maybe I could use the cache here, and that'll avoid me doing a URL fetch or maybe even a spreadsheet access or something like that. So it's a great service, and it is you do have user-based cache as well, in the same way that you've got user properties and script properties. You've also got user cache and script cache.
I think as well, Bruce, you've done some posts previously on optimizing with cache service and just the speed benefits. I think there were speed benefits as well from using cache over direct service calls.
Well, that's not so true as it used to be. When the spreadsheet service first came out, it was abysmal in terms of being able to be fast. But I think they've built caching into the service itself now, so there's not a massive difference now. I mean, obviously, you don't want to be getting cells one at a time, but if you're getting a massive amount of values from cache versus getting them from spreadsheet, I don't think there's a great difference in how long it takes.
So I think we're coming close to we've run over time slightly. We'll either redefine our our limits for the next call, or try and compress it down somehow. But as Bruce mentioned at the start of the call, this is very much a community thing. So this is not, these calls, none of us here are Google employees. We're putting this together ourselves. So it's very much, if this is going to be a success, and we hope you find this has been useful, it's really going to rely on your contributions to it. So we're going to share a link to a Google form which will allow you to submit your feedback, but also if you've got code examples you want to show off, or if you've got a particular question that you'd like addressed, then you can fill it in there, or just try and get in touch with us by other means. We're all quite active on the Google Apps Script community. And I'm just going to see if Bruce and Spencer have got anything they'd also like to add.
Yeah, well, I'm back on again, as you can see. I managed to get somebody left and kindly give me their spot. So again, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining. It's been interesting, and I'd reinforce what Martin said. This is going to be your spot for communication, and it would be great if some of you were to come and show and tell. Thanks, Martin. Spencer, you there?
Yep, I'm here. You know, like many of the people here that we have in this hangout, I'm around the forums often. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. Hit me with a private chat if you want to. I'm always willing to share a little snippet of code or kind of like a workflow issue. And thanks for coming.
Well, thanks everyone. So hopefully we'll see you around a similar sort of time in a month's time. And until then, enjoy.